I was on my way to the airport to take the wallet my husband had forgotten when the rideshare driver locked the doors and said, "Don't get out of the car, trust me." My heart raced. It was almost 2 in the morning and I was alone with a stranger in a desolate place. 5 minutes later, 3 police cars surrounded us with their sirens blaring. What I discovered that night destroyed everything I believed about my life. But before I continue, check if you are already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. It all started that Thursday, around 12:30 at night. I had just finished packing the suitcase for Richard, my husband, who needed to travel quickly to New York. He said it was for an urgent meeting with investors, something about closing an important contract for the company. I didn't ask. I never asked. During the 4 years of our marriage, I had learned to be the understanding wife, the one who supports without asking uncomfortable questions. Richard was always the perfect husband in my eyes, attentive, hardworking, successful. He ran a financial consulting firm that was thriving more and more. We lived in a spacious apartment in an exclusive neighborhood in Chicago. We had 2 imported cars in the garage, and I could dedicate myself to my work as a graphic designer, working from home without financial pressures. It was the kind of life many women dream of having. As I packed the last items in his suitcase, I noticed that Richard seemed more anxious than usual. He checked his cell phone every 2 minutes, and his hands shook slightly while he chose his ties. I attributed it to the stress of the sudden trip. He gave me a quick kiss on the forehead, murmured a hurried, "I love you," and went out the door carrying the suitcase and his laptop bag. The sound of the door closing echoed through the empty apartment. I sighed, feeling that familiar emptiness that always invaded me when he traveled. I went to his office to turn off the lights and organize the mess of papers he had left scattered on the desk. That was when my eyes found a brown leather object hidden among the folders. Richard's wallet. My heart accelerated immediately. That wallet contained everything. Documents, credit cards, cash. How would he board the plane without his official ID? How would he pay for anything without the cards? I took the wallet with trembling hands and opened it to confirm. All his documents were there intact. I looked at the wall clock. 12:40 at night. Richard's flight was at 3 in the morning. I still had time to take the wallet to the airport if I left immediately. I tried calling his cell phone, but the calls went straight to voicemail. He had probably put it on airplane mode, or maybe he was driving and couldn't answer. There was no time to lose. I needed to act. The problem is that I don't drive well at night. The light from other cars' headlights makes me dizzy, and I have trouble seeing the lanes. Our private driver had already left hours ago. The only option was to order a car through an app. I took my cell phone and opened the app with nervous fingers. I needed to find a driver quickly. The anxiety grew in my chest like a ball of fire. I imagined Richard arriving at the airport, frantically searching for the wallet in his pockets, panicking when he realized he had forgotten it. He needed that wallet. I needed to take it to him. After a few minutes that seemed eternal, a driver accepted the ride. His name appeared on the screen. James. Black car. License plate ending in 4. His rating was high, 5 stars. The app showed he was only 7 minutes away. I quickly put a jacket over my pajamas, put a scarf covering my hair, and grabbed my purse. I put Richard's wallet away carefully as if it were a precious treasure. In a way it was. That wallet represented my mission to be the perfect wife, the one who solves problems and takes care of everything. 5 minutes later, the intercom buzzed. I looked through the camera and saw the black car parked in front of the building. I went down quickly in the elevator, crossed the lobby, and went out to the street. The night was cold and damp, typical for May in Chicago. The neighborhood streets were deserted, illuminated only by the orange streetlights that created strange shadows on the sidewalks. I opened the back door of the car and got in. The interior was clean and smelled of lavender air freshener. The driver was a man of about 50, gray hair at the temples, thin and tired face. He greeted me with a silent nod without saying a word. "Good evening," I said, trying to sound natural. "I need to go to the airport domestic terminal. It is urgent." He just nodded and started driving. The silence inside the car was heavy, almost suffocating. There was no music playing on the radio, no conversation, just the sound of the engine and the noise of tires on wet asphalt. I tried calling Richard one more time, but again it went to voicemail. I sent him a message on WhatsApp. "Honey, you forgot your wallet. I'm bringing it to the airport. Wait for me in the departure lobby." The message stayed with just one check mark. It wasn't delivered. I leaned back in the seat, trying to calm my nerves. I looked out the window and saw the city passing by quickly. We left the residential neighborhood and entered the main avenue that led to the highway. Traffic was surprisingly light for a Thursday night. There were hardly any cars on the road. That was when I started to notice something strange. The driver, James, was constantly looking in the rearview mirror. Not just normal traffic checks, but long and intense looks, as if he were looking for something or someone. Our eyes met in the mirror a few times, and every time that happened, a shiver ran down my spine. There was something in his expression that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't threatening exactly, but there was a tension in his face, a worry I couldn't understand. I clutched Richard's wallet against my chest, suddenly very aware that I was alone in a car, with a stranger in the middle of the night going to a distant airport. The stories I had read on social media about crimes involving rideshare drivers began to invade my mind like unwanted ghosts. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to break the heavy silence. James didn't answer immediately. He changed lanes abruptly, making my body sway in the seat. My heart started beating faster. "Sorry." He finally said, his voice hoarse and low, "Just checking the traffic." But there was no traffic. The highway was practically empty. I took my cell phone discreetly and pretended to be checking some app, but in reality, I had my finger on the emergency button of the transport app itself. If something happened, I would need to be ready to call for help. As we got closer to the airport, the tension in the car increased. James continued looking in the mirrors obsessively, and now I could see beads of sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning being on. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The airport lights began to appear in the distance, an artificial glow against the black sky of the early morning. Normally, that sight would bring me relief, but that night it only intensified my fear, because instead of going straight to the main departure terminal well lit and full of movement, James started diverting the car toward a darker side area. "Wait!" I said, my voice coming out higher than normal. "Domestic departures is that way in that direction." "I know," he replied, but he didn't change direction. Panic began to take over me. My hand gripped the cell phone tightly, ready to activate the emergency alarm. I looked around for possible exits, calculating if I could open the door and jump out of the moving car. James drove to a less crowded drop-off area, far from the main doors. There were only a few streetlights working, creating patches of darkness between circles of dim light. There were no security guards in sight. There were no other cars, just the two of us and the threatening darkness. The car began to slow down. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I put my hand on the door handle, ready to run as soon as the car stopped. But when I tried to open it, the door didn't move. It was locked. The child safety locks had been activated by the driver. I was trapped. Panic exploded in my chest like a bomb. I pulled the handle hard once, twice, 3 times, but the door remained firmly closed. I tried the other door on the opposite side, stretching my body desperately, but it was also locked. All the doors were locked. I was completely trapped inside that car with a stranger in a desolate place in the middle of the night. "Why did you lock the doors?" My voice came out trembling, almost a scream. "Open them! Open now!" James didn't turn around. His hands kept gripping the steering wheel, and he kept his eyes fixed on the dark area in front of us. Sweat was now running openly down his face, going down his temples. "Do not get out here," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Please trust me." "Trust you?" I was almost hysterical now. "You locked me in the car. Let me out. Help." I started banging on the window, trying to get the attention of anyone who might be passing by. but the area was completely deserted. I grabbed my cell phone with trembling hands, ready to call the police. "Listen." James finally turned to me, and I could see genuine terror in his eyes. "I am not going to hurt you, but if you get out of this car now, something very bad is going to happen to you. You need to trust me, please." "Why?" I screamed. "Why can't I get out? What is going on?" "You will know in 5 minutes," he replied, turning back to the front. 5 minutes. That is all I ask. Stay in the car for 5 minutes. Tears began to run down my face. My mind was going in 1,000 different directions. Was I being kidnapped? Was he taking me somewhere? But why I wasn't rich? I didn't come from an important family. It made no sense. I looked around, desperately looking for something I could use as a weapon. My purse was next to me. Inside, it was a pepper spray I always carried, but it was buried at the bottom and I would have to dig through everything to find it. The seconds passed, like hours. James remained motionless in the front seat, looking obsessively outside as if he were waiting for something or someone. "Do you work for my husband?" I asked suddenly, a new theory arising in my confused mind. "Did he send you to do this? Is it some kind of test?" "I do not know your husband," James replied without looking back, "but I know your dad." My blood froze. My dad. My voice came out as a whisper. My dad died 3 years ago. I know I worked for him. I was head of his personal security for 15 years. Memories began to return. My father owned a chain of construction supply stores. He had personal security, especially after our family started receiving threats from competitors. I vaguely remembered an older man always present in the shadows when my dad went to important events. "James," I whispered, finally making the connection. "You are the James who worked with my dad." "Yes," he nodded slightly. "Before dying, your dad asked me for one last favor. He made me swear I would watch over you, even from a distance, that I would keep you safe." "What does that have to do with now? Why did you lock me in this car?" "Because I received information earlier today that something was going to happen to you tonight. Something very bad." My heart was beating so hard it hurt. "What kind of thing you were going to be kidnapped? As soon as you got out of this car, there was a man waiting in the shadows to drug you and take you. When I saw you had ordered a car to come to the airport in the middle of the night alone, I hacked the system and accepted the ride before another driver could. I needed to be the one to pick you up, to protect you." I tried to process what he was saying. It seemed crazy, like a movie story, but the genuine terror on his face, the tension in his body, it all seemed too real to be a lie. "Who would want to kidnap me?" I asked, my voice failing. "I have no money. I am nobody important." "You have a lot of money," James said calmly. "The inheritance your dad left you, and you are married to someone who knows exactly how much that inheritance is worth." The world seemed to stop around me. "Richard..." James didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. I looked at my husband's wallet I was still holding against my chest, and suddenly it seemed to weigh tons. Had Richard forgotten the wallet on purpose? Did he know I would come running to bring it to the airport? Was this all a trap? No. I whispered, "No. Richard loves me. He would never do this to me. You are wrong. Look." James pointed to the clock on the dashboard. 2 minutes left. 2 minutes for what? My whole body was shaking now. I didn't know if I should believe him or try to escape anyway. But something in the sincerity of his voice, in the terror of his eyes, made me stay. I sat there holding my breath, counting the seconds. 90 seconds, 60 seconds, 30 seconds. And then exactly when the clock struck 2:05, red and blue lights exploded around us. 3 police cars emerged from different directions, surrounding our car completely. Deafening sirens tore through the silence of the night. Officers jumped out of the cars with weapons in hand, shouting orders. But they weren't aiming at us. They were aiming at something behind our car in the shadows I couldn't see well. I turned my head and saw when the officers lunged at a figure hiding behind a concrete pillar. It was a man dressed all in black, wearing a ski mask. He tried to run but was violently tackled to the ground. 2 officers subdued him, while a third removed something from his jacket pocket, a syringe, and a cloth that seemed to be soaked in something chemical. My stomach churned. That man was there waiting for me. If I had gotten out of the car as had been my plan, he would have grabbed me, put that cloth on my face, drugged me. And then what? Taken. Where? To do what? With me? The tears returned, but this time they were different. They weren't tears of fear of James, but of absolute terror for what had almost happened. An officer tapped on the driver's window. James rolled down the glass. "Operation successful," the officer said. "The suspect is in custody. You are safe now." James finally unlocked the car doors. The sound of the lock clicking open was the sweetest sound I have ever heard in my life. But I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed by shock. James turned to me, his face now more relaxed, although still worried. "I am so sorry to have scared you," he said softly. "But if I had told you what was happening, you might have panicked and tried to get out of the car anyway. I needed to keep you inside, keep you safe until the police arrived." "How did you know?" I managed to ask. "How did you know this was going to happen?" "I have contacts, people who owe me favors from the time I worked with your dad. One of those people heard conversations, saw messages. He warned me a kidnapping was being planned for tonight at the airport, that you would be the victim. But who?" I was starting to go into shock. "Who planned this?" James hesitated. His expression became even more serious. "I need to show you something," he said slowly, "but you have to be prepared. What you are going to see is going to hurt you much more than what just happened." He took a tablet that was on the passenger seat and handed it to me. On the screen was a series of photos, surveillance photos taken from afar but clear enough for me to perfectly recognize who was in them. Richard, my husband. But he wasn't alone. In the photos, Richard was hugging a woman I knew very well. Ashley, my best friend since college. The same Ashley who was my maid of honor. The same Ashley who came to dinner at our house every week. In the photos, they were kissing. They were hugging. They were entering hotels together. The last photo showed the 2 of them at the airport. Not at the domestic terminal where Richard should be, but at the international terminal. And they weren't boarding for New York. They were boarding for Paris. With 2 large suitcases of someone who doesn't plan to return. I can't describe exactly what I felt in that moment. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness. It was as if something inside me simply disintegrated. As if all the last 4 years of my life were a lie so big my brain couldn't process the truth. My hands shook so much, I almost dropped the tablet. I kept swiping through the photos one after another, as if I were watching a horror movie I couldn't turn off. There were dozens of them. Photos of romantic dates, photos of passionate kisses, photos of them entering and leaving apartments I didn't know. The last photo had a date and time in the bottom corner. It had been taken less than 3 hours ago at the International Airport check-in counter. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking. "No, no, no." But the photos didn't lie. The reality was there, captured in sharp and cruel pixels. "There is more," James said, his voice heavy with pity. He took the tablet back and opened a different folder. Financial information. Documents we got through a private investigator I hired 2 weeks ago when I started to suspect. On the screen appeared bank statements. My bank statements. From the joint account I shared with Richard but rarely checked, because I trusted him completely. He took care of the household finances, the investments, everything. Huge transfers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars being moved systematically from the joint account to an account I didn't recognize. An offshore account. The transfers had been happening for more than a year. "He was stealing from you," James explained, "systematically. He had access to the inheritance your dad left you because you put everything in a joint account when you got married. You thought you were being a modern and trusting wife, but he was waiting for exactly that. Tears flowed freely now. I sobbed, hugging my own body, rocking back and forth in the back seat of the car. But the money wasn't enough, James continued relentlessly. It was better that I knew everything at once, like ripping off a Band-Aid. There is something else. He opened another document. It was a life insurance policy, a massive policy for $1 million with me as the insured and Richard as the sole beneficiary. The policy had been opened 6 months ago. I didn't even know of its existence. How did he manage to do that without my signature? I asked, my voice coming out strange, distant, as if it weren't mine. You signed it, James said softly. Remember that time a few months ago when Richard asked you to sign some papers from the accountant? He said it was for tax returns. I remembered. It had been a Saturday morning. Richard had brought a stack of papers for me to sign. I was in a hurry making lunch, and he was rushing me, saying the accountant needed the documents urgently. I signed everything without reading. I trusted him. Why would I read? In the middle of those papers was the insurance policy. James explained, and along with it, a power of attorney giving Richard full powers over all your assets, including the properties you inherited from your dad. I was dizzy, literally dizzy. I opened the car door, which was now unlocked, and vomited on the street, my body physically rejecting that horrible reality. When I finished, I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and leaned back in the seat, feeling completely empty. So the plan was to kill me, I said, not as a question, but as a statement. The kidnapping tonight, they were going to kill me. Richard would keep the insurance, the properties, everything, and would be in Paris with Ashley starting a new life with my money. Exactly. James nodded. The man the police just arrested is a known criminal. He was hired to do the dirty work. After the kidnapping, your body would probably be found somewhere simulating a robbery gone wrong. Richard would be in another country with a perfect alibi. He would return to the U.S. as the devastated husband, cry in interviews, receive condolences, and then disappear to a non-extradition country with all your inheritance. It was a perfect plan. Diabolical, but perfect. How did you discover all this? I asked. How did you know it was going to happen tonight? When your dad was dying, James began. He made me promise to watch over you. He had a feeling about Richard, you know. He never liked him, never completely trusted him. He said there was something fake in the way Richard looked at you, as if he were evaluating an investment instead of looking at the woman he loved. I remembered the arguments between my dad and Richard. I remembered how my dad had been against the wedding at first. I thought he was just an overprotective father who didn't want to accept his daughter was growing up. But he had seen something that I, blind with passion, couldn't see. After your dad died, I kept watching you from afar. James continued, not all the time, but periodically. I checked your social media, kept in contact with some employees from your dad's company who now worked for you. And 3 months ago, one of those contacts told me something strange. Richard had asked about how to sell inherited properties without attracting the attention of tax authorities. That made me suspicious. I hired a private investigator. It was he who discovered the affair with Ashley, the money transfers, the fake insurance policy. Everything started to fit. And a week ago, my contact in the criminal underworld warned me that someone had put a contract on the head of a young, wealthy woman. The description matched you. I didn't know exactly when or where it would happen, but I stayed on high alert. Tonight, when I saw your ride request to the airport in the system alone in the middle of the night, I knew. It was the perfect opportunity for a kidnapping. Public place, but with desolate areas, a time when you would be vulnerable, and the perfect alibi for Richard, who would be in another country. I hacked the app system to ensure I would be the assigned driver, and I alerted my contacts in the police. They were monitoring the situation, waiting for the criminal to appear. The plan was to catch him in the act. I was listening to everything, but it seemed like a dream, a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. "The wallet," I said, suddenly looking at the cursed object that was still next to me on the seat. "He left the wallet on purpose, right?" "Yes, it was the bait. He knew you were the type of person who would go out in the middle of the night to help him. He counted on that, on your kindness, your dedication, your love for him." Every word was a stab in my already shattered heart. I took the wallet with trembling hands. For the first time, I really examined it. I opened all the compartments, and that was when I found it. A folded piece of paper hidden behind the credit cards. When I opened the paper, I saw it was a copy of another document, a deed, transferring the main property of my inheritance, the commercial building downtown that was worth millions, to Richard's name. And right below, a signature. My signature. But I had never signed that. "Forgery," James said, looking over the seat. "With the power of attorney you signed without knowing he may have forged other signatures too. He probably already transferred several properties to his name. All planned so that as soon as you died, he would already have legal control of everything. Without complications, without waiting for a will, without family fighting for the inheritance. It was genius. It was monstrous." I looked out the car window. The police were still dealing with the kidnapper. An ambulance had arrived. Other officers were securing the perimeter, collecting evidence. And somewhere inside that airport in the international terminal, Richard was waiting to board. Waiting to leave for Paris with Ashley, with my money waiting to receive the news that the plan had worked, that I was dead. But I wasn't dead. I was very much alive, and absolutely furious. The sadness that had consumed me began to transform into something different, something cold and sharp, a crystalline rage that gave me a mental clarity I hadn't had in hours. "Where are they?" I asked, my voice now firm. "Richard and Ashley, where exactly are they?" James checked his watch. "Their flight leaves in 40 minutes, International Gate 12. "But you can't just go and confront them. It would be dangerous." "I am not going to confront them," I said, my mind already working, planning. "Not yet. I need to be smart about this." I looked at James, at this man I barely knew, but who had saved my life, who had kept the promise he made to my dying father. "You said you have a private investigator. Is he good?" "The best." "And your contacts in the police, can they help with what I am going to need?" James smiled for the first time that night, a small smile but genuine. "What do you have in mind?" I didn't sleep that night. How could I? While Richard boarded for Paris believing his plan was unfolding perfectly, I was at a police station giving my full statement. The kidnapper had confessed everything when confronted with the evidence. He said he had been hired by a man he knew only as Leo. The description matched Richard perfectly. There were text messages on a burner phone with detailed instructions on where to pick me up, when to act, and how to make it look like a robbery followed by homicide. The evidence was overwhelming, but the detective in charge of the case gave me advice I will never forget. "Ma'am," he told me, looking at me with those tired eyes of someone who has seen everything in life, "we have enough evidence to arrest your husband as soon as he returns to the U.S., but if you really want to destroy his plan completely, if you want to get back everything he stole, you need to be smarter than that." "What do you mean?" "He cannot know that you know. If he finds out the kidnapper was arrested, that the plan failed, he will never return to the country. He will stay in Europe or flee to another country with no extradition. And even if we manage to arrest him eventually, the money he transferred to offshore accounts will be almost impossible to recover." I understood what he was saying. If I wanted true justice, I needed to play Richard's game. I needed to pretend nothing had happened. "But how am I going to do that?" I asked. "He will expect to receive the news of my death." "When that doesn't happen, he will suspect." "Exactly." the detective agreed. That is why you need to create a story that explains why you didn't go to the airport, why you are alive, but in a way that doesn't raise suspicions. We spent the next few hours working out a plan. With the help of James, the private investigator, and a prosecutor specializing in financial crimes who joined us, we created a perfect story. When the sun began to rise, I was back in my apartment. It seemed like a different place now. Every corner held memories that I now knew were false. The sofa where we watched TV together, the bed where we made love, the kitchen where I prepared his favorite breakfast every Sunday. All lies, all a facade, but I couldn't show that I knew. Not yet. I lay in the bed that still smelled of his cologne and forced my eyes to close for a few hours. I needed to be rested for what was coming next. At 9 in the morning, my cell phone rang. It was Richard. I looked at the screen for a long moment before answering. My hand shook, but I took a deep breath, put on my best loving wife mask, and answered. "Honey." His voice sounded falsely cheerful. "Are you okay? I tried calling you last night several times." "Hi, my love," I replied, forcing a sleepy tone. "Sorry I fell asleep early and left the phone on silent. I was so tired." There was a pause on the other end, a pause that lasted only 2 seconds but seemed like an eternity. He was confused. I should be dead. Why was I answering the phone, normally talking about falling asleep early? "Oh," he said finally, "so you didn't go to the airport." "Airport? Why would I go to the airport?" Another pause, longer this time. "Your wallet," I said, following the script we had prepared. "You forgot your wallet here at home. I was going to take it to you at the airport, but when I was getting ready to leave, I got a horrible migraine, one of those really strong ones. I took a pill and passed out on the sofa. I just woke up." "Sorry, honey, did you manage to board without the wallet?" I could hear Richard breathing on the other end. He was trying to process the information, trying to understand what had gone wrong with his perfect plan. Yes, I managed." He lied. Of course he had managed to board. He had his real documents with him. The forgotten wallet was just bait. He had a copy of my ID in the suitcase. Everything went well. "That's great." I feigned relief. I was so worried. "How is the meeting going?" "Great, great." He lied again. "It might take a few days longer than I thought. Maybe a week. Will you be okay alone?" A week. Time enough for him to discover his plan had failed. Time for him and Ashley to come up with a new plan or simply disappear. "Of course, honey, you know I will. Just take care and message me every day, okay?" "Okay, I love you." The words came out of his mouth so easily. "I love you." How could he say that knowing he had hired someone to kill me? "Me too," I replied, almost choking on the words. I hung up and immediately dropped the phone on the floor. I ran to the bathroom and vomited again. There was nothing in my stomach to come out, but my body kept contracting, trying to expel the disgust I felt. After I composed myself, I called James. He called, I reported. He believed the story, but said he will stay away for a week. "Perfect," James replied. "That gives us time. The investigator is already tracking his bank movements, and I have good news. We got a court order to freeze his offshore accounts. The judge was very receptive when I showed the evidence of the murder plot. And Ashley, she is with him in Paris. She posted a photo on Instagram an hour ago. They are in a 5-star hotel. She captioned it, 'Well-deserved vacation.'" James couldn't hide the contempt in his voice. "Well-deserved vacation. With my money. Celebrating what she thought was my death." "I want to see the photo," I said. "I don't think that is a good idea." "I want to see." James sighed but sent me the link. I opened Ashley's Instagram with my heart racing. There she was in a bikini in a luxurious pool overlooking the city of Paris, smiling, broadly radiant. And in the background, slightly out of focus but clearly visible, was Richard, also smiling, holding a glass of champagne. The comments were all from mutual friends of ours. "Amazing, you deserve it. Enjoy it so much. Jealous in a good way. If they only knew." I spent the next few days preparing. The private investigator brought more information. Richard and Ashley had been together for almost 2 years. It had started at a company party where Ashley worked, and Richard had gone as my date. They had connected exchange numbers, and the affair started shortly after. The evidence was painful to see. Passionate text messages, intimate photos, videos that made me want to die of shame and anger. But I forced myself to watch everything. I needed to know the full extent of the betrayal. The investigator also discovered that Richard had debts, lots of debts, online gambling, bad investments, loans with loan sharks. He was drowning in debts I never knew existed. My money wasn't just greed, it was necessity. He needed those millions to pay his debts and start a new life with Ashley. "How much does he owe?" I asked. "Almost $200,000. The investigator replied, "And the loan sharks are getting impatient. There are death threats in the messages." He was desperate. That is why the timing of the plan. He couldn't wait any longer. He needed the insurance money and the properties now before the loan sharks decided to eliminate him first. And Ashley knew all this. Every conversation between them is documented. Yes, she knew. She was actually the one who suggested the kidnapping plan. She was the one who found the criminal through her contacts. Richard was the financial brain, but Ashley was the strategist. My best friend, the woman I considered a sister, who had been my bridesmaid, who I had comforted when her relationships ended, who had spent holidays with my family. She had planned my death. On the 4th day, Richard called me again. "Honey, I have bad news." He said, his voice perfectly calibrated to sound disappointed. "The meetings here are going to take longer than I thought. Maybe 2 weeks." 2 weeks. I feigned surprise. "Wow, that long." "Yes, people here are very complicated, but the contract will be worth it. When I get back, we're going to take a trip, just the two of us, to celebrate. What do you think, a trip? Probably to some remote place where it would be easy to fake an accident." But I played along. "I would love that. Where are you thinking?" "I will let it be a surprise," he said, and I could hear the poisonous smile in his voice. After hanging up, I sat on the floor of my bedroom and finally let the tears fall. I cried for all the lies, all the betrayals, all the moments I thought were real, but were just theater. I cried for the naive version of myself that had died that night at the airport. But after crying, I got up, washed my face, and did something I had never done before in my life. I called a lawyer specializing in complicated divorces and asset recovery. It was time to fight back. The lawyer James recommended was a woman named Brenda Miller. She had short gray hair, thick-rimmed glasses, and a look that seemed to see through lies with the ease of someone reading a menu. In her impeccably organized office, she reviewed all the documents the investigator had gathered. "It is one of the clearest cases of attempted murder for financial gain I have ever seen," she said after an hour analyzing everything. "And we have something most victims don't have: concrete evidence before the crime was consummated." "So can you help me get everything back?" I asked. "More than that, I can help you ensure your husband spends decades in prison, and your friend too." The word friend still hurt when applied to Ashley. How had I been so blind? Brenda explained the legal strategy. First, prosecute Richard for attempted murder conspiracy to commit murder, forgery of documents, and embezzlement. Simultaneously move civil actions to recover all the money he had transferred illegally and annul all power of attorneys and fake documents. "Time is crucial," she explained. "We need to wait for the right moment to act. If we do it too soon, he might flee to a country with no extradition treaty. If we wait too long, he might dissipate more assets." When would be the ideal moment? When he returns to the U.S., when he steps on American soil again, thinking he is safe, that his plan is working. That is where we act. But how are we going to make him return? He can simply stay in Europe indefinitely. Brenda smiled. It was a smile that had no warmth. It was the smile of a predator who has just spotted prey. "That is where our bait comes in. You are going to order him to return, and he will come running." We spent the next few hours planning every detail. It was risky, but it could work. It had to work. That night, I recorded a video message for Richard. It had to look natural, spontaneous, so I recorded several times until it sounded perfect. "Hi, honey." I began forcing a smile. "I know you are super busy there, but I had some news and couldn't wait to tell you. Remember that land my dad had in downtown, the vacant lot, the one we always thought wasn't worth much? Well, a buyer appeared, and he is offering $2 million cash." I paused to let the number take effect. I know it is crazy, but it is a big developer. They want to develop a luxury building there, but the best part is they want to close the deal this week. The broker said if I don't accept soon, they are going to look for another lot. I didn't want to decide something so big without you here. Do you think you can come back a few days early, just so we can sign the papers together and decide what to do with all that money? I love you. Come back soon. I sent the video and waited. The answer came in less than 15 minutes. "Honey, what amazing news, $2 million. Of course I am coming back. I will reschedule everything here. I arrive the day after tomorrow. Don't sign anything without me, okay? We are going to decide this together. Love you so much." He had taken the bait. Of course there was no buyer. There was no $2 million offer. It was all a lie. But Richard didn't know that. All he saw were more millions to put in his offshore account, more money to support his new life with Ashley. He bit the hook. I alerted Brenda and James. "He arrives in 2 days." "Perfect," Brenda replied. "I will prepare all the legal documents. The moment he arrives in the U.S., we will have arrest warrants, account freezing orders, all set. But we have to wait for him to step into the airport." "And Ashley?" "She is still in Paris. Our jurisdiction doesn't reach there, but we have a request for international preventive detention in process. As soon as she tries to enter any country with an extradition treaty with the U.S., she will be arrested." The next 2 days were the longest of my life. I tried to maintain the appearance of normality. I left the house, went to the supermarket, answered messages from other friends as if nothing was happening. But inside, I was a bundle of anxiety and anticipation. Richard sent me messages constantly saying how anxious he was to return, how much he missed me, how we were going to celebrate that amazing land sale. Every message was a lie so well constructed that if I didn't know the truth, I would have believed completely. The night before his arrival, I couldn't sleep. I stayed staring at the ceiling, reviewing the plan hundreds of times in my head. What if something went wrong? What if he suspected? What if he fled before the police could arrest him? But no, I had to trust the plan. I had to trust that justice would be done. The morning of Richard's arrival, Brenda called me. "Everything is ready. Federal agents will be at the airport. The moment he goes through immigration, he will be arrested. Do you want to be there, hon?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "I want to see his face." I met James at the airport entrance. He had a serious but supportive expression. Together we went to an observation room the authorities had prepared. From there, we could see the international arrival area through a mirrored glass. It was 3 p.m. when the flight from Paris finally landed. My heart beat so hard I thought it was going to explode. I watched as the first passengers began to come out dragging their suitcases, some being greeted by happy relatives. And then I saw him. Richard came out the arrival door dragging his suitcase, wearing the gray suit I had bought for him on his last birthday. He was smiling, checking his cell phone, probably sending me a message saying he had arrived. He headed to the immigration line without a hurry, without a worry in the world. He presented his passport to the officer who scanned it in the system. That was when everything changed. I saw the officer say something into the radio. Immediately, 2 federal agents approached Richard from behind. He still hadn't realized anything. He kept smiling, waiting to get his passport back. When the agents touched his shoulders, he turned confused. One of the agents said something I couldn't hear from where I was. Richard's expression changed from confusion to absolute shock in a matter of seconds. He started talking, gesturing, trying to explain something, but the agents weren't interested in explanations. One of them held Richard's arm while the other took out handcuffs. That was when Richard panicked. He tried to break free, looking around desperately as if searching for an exit. But he was surrounded. More agents approached. The handcuffs were placed on his wrists, and it was at that moment he looked in the direction of the mirrored glass. He couldn't see me, but our eyes met through the glass. I don't know if it was coincidence or if some primal instinct told him where I was, but I swear I could see the exact moment he understood. The moment he realized I knew everything, that the plan had failed, that he had been caught. The expression on his face was of pure terror. He shouted something. He tried to run even while handcuffed, but was tackled to the ground by the agents. Other travelers watched the scene, shocked, taking out their cell phones to film. Richard was being dragged across the airport floor, shouting my name when I finally collapsed. I fell to my knees in that observation room, sobbing uncontrollably. It wasn't sadness. It was relief. It was rage. It was satisfaction. It was everything mixed in an emotional storm I couldn't control. James hugged me, letting me cry on his shoulder, as if he were my father. And in that moment, he was. He was the father figure my dad was no longer here to be. He was the protector who had saved my life and was now helping me get it back. "It is over," he whispered. "You are safe now. It is over." But it wasn't over. Not completely yet. Richard was taken directly to a holding cell at the federal facility in the airport. Brenda informed me he had the right to a lawyer and would probably remain silent until one arrived. It was standard procedure, but what she didn't expect was that Richard would start talking immediately, trying to make a deal, trying to blame others. He is saying he was coerced. Brenda called me 2 hours after the arrest, saying Ashley planned everything, that she threatened him, that he was the victim. And the police believe him? Of course not. We have the messages between them. We have the bank transfers he authorized himself. We have the statement from the hired criminal specifically identifying Richard as the one who paid him. He is just trying to reduce his sentence. And Ashley. Does she know Richard was arrested? Not yet. She is in Paris. She posted a photo on Instagram an hour ago from a fancy restaurant. Completely oblivious. I looked at the photo on my cell phone. Ashley was stunning in a red dress, holding a glass of wine, smiling at the camera as if she didn't have a worry in the world. The caption read, "Life is beautiful when you are with who you love." When you are with who you love. She was talking about my husband, the man she had helped plan my murder. "I want to talk to him," I said suddenly. "To Richard. I want to see him face to face." "I don't recommend it," Brenda replied immediately. "It can be very traumatic for you, and he might try to manipulate you. That is what people like that do." "I need to do it. I need to look him in the eye and ask why." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Okay, I will arrange it, but I will go with you, and it will be in a supervised room with guards present. If at any moment you want to leave, we leave. Agreed." Agreed. The meeting was scheduled for the next day. I spent the whole night without sleep rehearsing what I would say, imagining what it would be like to look at the man I loved and see a stranger. When I arrived at the station, my hands were shaking so much that James, who insisted on accompanying me along with the lawyer, had to hold my arm to guide me through the corridors. Richard was in an interrogation room. Through a glass window, I could see him before entering. He was no longer wearing the elegant suit. It had been changed for an orange inmate uniform. His face was pale, deep circles under his eyes. He seemed to have aged 10 years in 2 days. When I opened the door and entered, he lifted his head. Our eyes met, and to my surprise, he started to cry. "Honey," he sobbed. "Honey, I am so sorry I didn't want to. It wasn't supposed to be like this." I sat in the chair on the other side of the table, keeping my expression neutral. Brenda and James stood behind me, a silent but comforting presence. "Don't call me honey," I said, my voice coming out colder than I expected. "You lost the right to call me that when you hired someone to kill me." "No, no," he shook his head violently. "You don't understand. I never wanted you to get hurt. I swear. It was Ashley. She was the one who—" "Don't blame Ashley," I interrupted him. "I saw the messages. All of them. I know you were involved in this from the beginning." Richard froze. The mask of regret slipped a little, and for a moment I saw something darker in his eyes. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I loved you. I would have given you anything. If you needed money, I would have helped you. If you didn't love me anymore, we could have divorced. Why choose to kill me?" He looked down at his own handcuffed hands on the table. "You wouldn't understand," he murmured. "Make me understand." There was a long silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, colder, more honest perhaps. "Because you were too easy," he said. "You trusted everything I said. You signed everything I asked. You never questioned anything. You were so obedient, so predictable, and I started to despise you for it." Every word was a stab, but I forced myself to remain impassive. When I met Ashley, she was the opposite of you. She was defiant, smart, ambitious. She made me feel alive in a way you never did. And yes, I know it sounds cruel, but you asked for the truth. And the money. Richard gave a bitter smile. Money made everything possible. I had debts, lots of debts. I had made stupid investments, bet on businesses that failed. The loan sharks were chasing me. I needed a way out, and you with all that inheritance from your dad were the perfect way out. So you used me from the beginning. Not from the beginning, he admitted. In the beginning, I really liked you. But when your dad died and you inherited everything that was, when I realized the potential, and when the debt started to squeeze, when Ashley entered the scene, the plan started to make sense. The plan to kill me. The plan to solve all my problems at once. He corrected, as if they were the same thing. You would die thinking you were loved. Ashley and I would keep the money to live the life we deserved. Everyone won, except me, who would be dead. Richard shrugged. He really shrugged, as if my death were a minor detail in the grand scheme of things. It was at that moment that any trace of love that might still exist inside me died completely. There was no more pain. There was only a cold void where a heart used to be. "You are going to rot in prison," I said calmly, "and every penny you stole from me will be returned. Every property you tried to transfer illegally will return to my name, and Ashley will join you behind bars eventually." "Ashley is in Europe," Richard said with a smug smile. "They will never catch her." "We will see." I stood up. "I hope you both enjoyed these days of freedom well, because they will be the last you will have for the next 20 or 30 years. I started to turn to leave, but Richard called me. "Wait." I stopped, but didn't turn around. "Are you going to forgive me someday?" he asked, and for the first time since I entered the room, his voice sounded genuinely vulnerable. I turned slowly and looked at him one last time. "Forgiving means that what you did had some value, some meaning worth being reconciled, but what you did had no value whatsoever. It was mean, cowardly, and pathetic. So no, Richard, I am not going to forgive you. I am simply going to forget you, as if you never existed in my life." I left the room without looking back. In the hallway, I let the tears finally fall. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of closure, of liberation. "Are you okay?" James asked, putting a protective hand on my shoulder. "Yes," I replied and realized it was true. "I am fine. For the first time in days, I am really fine." Brenda checked her cell phone and smiled. "I have good news. Interpol accepted our request. There is an international arrest warrant against Ashley. As soon as she tries to return to the U.S. or travel to any country with an extradition treaty, she will be detained. How much time does she have of freedom? Not much. She already bought a return ticket to Mexico in 3 days. She was probably planning to return to the U.S. or Mexico when she thought things had calmed down, pretend she didn't know anything about Richard's plan. And when she gets arrested, will she face the same accusations as him? Exactly. Conspiracy to commit murder, participation in planned crime, complicity. She might receive even more time than Richard because the evidence shows it was she who found the hired criminal. 3 days later, I received the call I was waiting for. Ashley had been arrested at the airport in Madrid when trying to check in for her return flight. Spanish authorities executed the international warrant and transferred her to a detention cell until the extradition procedures were concluded. But unlike Richard, who immediately tried to blame her, Ashley remained completely silent. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't give statements. She just sat in her cell staring at the wall. Spanish officers said she seemed to be in shock, as if she couldn't believe she had been caught. In the following weeks, my life turned upside down, but this time in a positive way. With Brenda's help, I managed to annul all fake power of attorneys and illegal transfers. Richard's offshore accounts were located and blocked. The process of recovering the funds would be long, but at least it was underway. The apartment where I had lived with Richard was put up for sale. I couldn't step in that place anymore without feeling nauseous. Every corner held memories contaminated by his lies. I bought a smaller, cozier apartment in another neighborhood, a place that was just mine without ghosts of the past. James continued to be a constant presence in my life. He became more than a protector. He became a true friend, a father figure my dad was no longer here to be. Sometimes we had dinner together, and he told me stories about my dad I had never heard. It made me feel connected to him again. "Your dad was a very wise man," James told me one night during one of those dinners. He told me once that trust is the most precious thing we can give someone, but also the most dangerous, because once broken, it never goes back to what it was before. He was right. I agreed. I trusted too much. I was naive. No. James shook his head. You weren't naive. You were kind, generous, loving. Don't let the betrayal of a bad person transform you into someone suspicious and bitter. Your dad wouldn't like that. His words stayed with me. Richard's trial happened 6 months after his arrest. The room was full, the media was present, and I sat in the front row determined to look him in the eye during every moment of the process. He had lost weight in prison and his face was thinner, older. His lawyer tried to claim he had been coerced by Ashley, that she was the true mind behind everything. But the evidence was irrefutable. Text messages clearly showed he was an active and enthusiastic participant in the plan. When it was my turn to testify, I went up to the stand and recounted everything. The night in the car with James, the discovery of the photos, the lies, the fear I felt when I thought I was going to die. My voice remained firm during the entire testimony, even as tears ran down my face. Richard didn't look at me a single time during my testimony. He kept his eyes lowered with the appearance of a man who had already accepted his fate. The sentence was 25 years in prison without possibility of parole for 15 years for attempted murder, forgery of documents, embezzlement, and a list of other crimes. When the judge banged the gavel, I felt a huge weight being lifted from my shoulders. Justice had been done. Ashley was extradited 3 months after Richard's trial. Her trial was even more dramatic because, unlike him, she decided to fight, hired the best lawyer she could find, and tried to argue she had been manipulated by Richard, that she was a victim of his lies too. But the evidence didn't allow that narrative. Messages showed that many times it was Ashley who took the initiative, who made the most sordid suggestions. It was she who found the criminal to kidnap me. It was she who suggested making it look like a robbery gone wrong. The worst moment of the trial was when the prosecution presented a conversation between Ashley and Richard that occurred days before the attempted kidnapping. In that conversation, they talked about what their new life would be like after I was out of the way. Ashley even mentioned that part of the money would be used to get plastic surgery to look even prettier for Richard. She'd calculated the value of my life and decided it was worth less than cosmetic surgery. When it came time for me to testify at her trial, Ashley finally looked me in the eye. And unlike Richard, who seemed regretful, albeit falsely, Ashley looked at me with pure hate, as if I were the villain of the story for having survived. Ashley. The prosecutor asked her during her own testimony, "Do you have anything to say to the victim?" Ashley looked directly at me and said, "Yes, you were always boring. You were always bland. Richard was only with you for the money from the beginning. He told me several times, you were never enough." The words should have hurt me, but instead they made me realize Ashley had never been my friend, neither before Richard nor during. She'd always been an actress playing a role waiting for the right moment to show her true colors. "Thank you for showing me who you really are," I replied calmly. Now I know I didn't lose a friend because I never had one. Ashley received 20 years in prison, a little less than Richard, but still a significant sentence. When she was led out of the courtroom, handcuffed and crying, I realized I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel joy for her punishment. I felt only emptiness and then relief that that chapter was finally closed. A year after the trials, my life had found a new rhythm. I went back to working as a graphic designer, but now with a confidence I never had before. I opened my own studio and was doing well. I made new friends, genuine people who entered my life and showed me what true friendship means. I started going to therapy to process all the trauma and slowly learned to trust again, but more wisely this time. James continued to be an important part of my life. He took me to dinner once a week, advised me on business decisions, and was always available when I needed to talk. He never charged anything for having saved my life. He said he had made a promise to my dad, and honoring that promise was payment enough. On a Thursday afternoon, exactly 2 years after that terrible night at the airport, I received a letter. It was from Richard from prison. I stared at the envelope for a long time, deciding if I should open it or just throw it away. Curiosity won. The letter was long pages and pages of his always impeccable handwriting. He talked about how prison had changed him, how he had time to think about everything he had done wrong. He said he finally understood the gravity of his actions, that he was doing therapy and working on becoming a better person. On the last page, he wrote, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I am not asking for it. I just wanted you to know I am truly sorry. You deserve true love, loyalty, respect. And I failed to give you all that. I hope you found the happiness you always deserved." I folded the letter back into the envelope. I won't lie, part of me felt moved by the words. But another part, the part that had grown and matured through this experience, knew that pretty words didn't change horrible actions. I put the letter in a box where I kept all the documents from the trial. One day, maybe years in the future, I could look back and forgive him, not for him, but for me, to finally let go of any trace of resentment. But today was not that day. That night, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment watching the city lights. I thought about how my life had changed dramatically in 2 years, how I had gone from being a naive and trusting wife to a woman who was almost killed to someone who fought for justice and won. It wasn't the journey I would have chosen, but it was the journey that brought me here to this version of myself that was stronger, wiser, more complete than I had ever been. I took my cell phone and called James. "Hi," I said when he answered. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything, for saving my life, for honoring the promise you made to my dad, for being the hero I didn't know I needed." "It was an honor," James replied, his voice warm and sincere. "Your dad would be very proud of the woman you became." "I know I am." After hanging up, I stared at the night for a while longer, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. The months that followed brought transformations I never imagined were possible. My design studio was growing. I had received contracts from big companies that admired not only my work, but also my story of overcoming. Some business magazines had published articles about my journey, portraying me as an example of female resilience. At first, I had hesitated to make my story public. It was so personal, so painful. But Brenda convinced me that sharing it could help other women in similar situations, women who maybe hadn't been lucky enough to have a James to save them. And she was right. After the first interviews, I started receiving messages from women all over the country, some telling their own stories of betrayal and financial abuse, others asking for advice on how to identify red flags in relationships, some simply thanking me for having the courage to speak up. I decided to use my experience for something positive. With part of the money I recovered from Richard, I created a foundation to help women victims of domestic violence and financial abuse. We offered free legal assistance, psychological help, and even temporary shelter for those who needed to escape dangerous situations. James became the foundation's security consultant, training women and their children on how to protect themselves, how to identify risky situations, and what to do in emergencies. In one of the talks I gave at the foundation, a young woman of about 25 approached me afterwards. She was crying, but they were tears of hope. "Thank you," she said, holding my hands. "My story is similar to yours. My boyfriend has manipulated me financially for years. I thought I was alone, that it only happened to me. But listening to you, I realized it is not my fault and that I can escape." In that moment, all the sleepless nights, all the moments of pain, all the tears I shed gained a new meaning. My suffering hadn't been in vain if I could help even just one person. Personal life also began to bloom in unexpected ways. I had met an architect named Andrew who had done the project for the foundation's new headquarters. He was gentle, genuine, and most importantly, patient with my trauma and my barriers. "I am in no hurry," he told me on one of our first dates when I explained I needed to go slow, that it was hard to trust after everything I had been through. "You are worth waiting for." It wasn't like it had been with Richard. There wasn't that overwhelming and blind passion, but there was something better. Mutual respect, honest communication, and a gradual growth of feelings that were based on who we really were, not on masks we wore. Andrew knew my whole story. I had been completely honest about what happened, about my fears and insecurities, and he never used that against me, never made me feel weak or broken. On the contrary, he admired my strength. "You survived something that would have destroyed most people," he told me one night while we had dinner at a cozy restaurant. "And you didn't just survive, but you transformed that pain into something that helps other people. That is extraordinary." 3 years after that fateful night at the airport, I received another letter. This time, it was from Ashley. Like Richard's, this letter was full of requests for apology, of regret, of promises that she had changed. But unlike Richard's letter, which at least sounded sincere, Ashley's had a tone of manipulation that I could now identify easily. She wrote about how she was suffering in prison, how the other inmates treated her badly when they found out what she had done. She mentioned health problems she was developing, and then on the last page she made a request. "Could you write a letter to the judge asking for sentence reduction after all we were best friends once?" I shook my head as I read. Ashley was still Ashley, always calculating, always trying to manipulate, always believing that tears and sad stories would give her what she wanted. I didn't answer the letter. It wasn't necessary. Ashley had made her choices and now needed to live with the consequences. But I kept the letter together with Richard's, not as a memory of pain, but as a reminder of how much I had grown, of how I was no longer that woman who trusted blindly, who didn't ask questions, who put the needs of others before her own. On a Sunday afternoon, 4 years after everything happened, I was in the kitchen of my apartment preparing lunch. Andrew was in the living room assembling a bookshelf we had bought. Soft music played on the stereo, and through the window I could see the blue, cloudless sky. My cell phone rang. It was James. "Hi, dear," he said, his voice sounding tired. "I have news." What happened? Richard tried to commit suicide in prison. He is in the hospital now, stable, but it was serious. My heart clenched not out of love or romantic worry, but out of a basic human sadness. As much as he had hurt me, hearing that someone had reached such a point of desperation was hard. "How do you feel about it?" James asked. I thought for a moment before answering. "Sad," I admitted, "but not guilty. He made decisions that led him to where he is, and I hope he finds some peace eventually, however that happens. But it is not my responsibility to save him. Not anymore." "You have grown a lot," James said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. "You have become exactly the kind of woman your dad dreamed you would be. Strong, compassionate, but with healthy boundaries." After hanging up, I stood in the kitchen for a moment, processing the news. Andrew came to hug me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Is everything okay?" he asked softly. "Yes," I replied, and it was true. Everything is okay. That night, after Andrew went home and I was alone in the apartment, I took a box I kept at the back of the closet. It was where I had put everything related to Richard and Ashley: letters, wedding photos, small souvenirs from a time that seemed to belong to another life. I took the box to the balcony and started reviewing each item. Some photos still made me feel a twinge of pain. Memories of moments I thought were genuine but were just theater. But the pain was distant now, like an old scar that no longer hurts. I took one last photo. It was from my wedding, Richard and I cutting the cake, smiling at the camera. Ashley was in the background clapping. If I looked closely now, I could see something in her eyes, a glint that wasn't happiness for her friend, but perhaps envy or calculation. How hadn't I seen it? How had I been so blind? But then I remembered James' words. It hadn't been blindness, it had been kindness. It had been love and trust, things that aren't defects. People like Richard and Ashley were the problem, not people like me. I put the photo back in the box, and for the first time, I seriously considered getting rid of everything. I didn't need to keep these things anymore. I didn't need the physical evidence that had happened. It was etched in my memory, it had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I decided that the next week I would take the box to a recycling place. It was time to let go completely. 5 years after that night at the airport, my life was unrecognizable from what it had been. Andrew and I had married in a small and intimate ceremony, only with people we truly loved. James walked me down the aisle, assuming the role my father would have played. The foundation was flourishing, having already helped hundreds of women escape dangerous situations. My design studio was a success. And most importantly, I was happy, genuinely, deeply happy. It wasn't a naive happiness like before. It was an informed happiness tempered by difficult experiences, but real nonetheless. Maybe even more real because of it. I received one last notification about Richard. He had been transferred to a psychiatric wing of the prison after the suicide attempt. He was receiving treatment and, according to reports, was finally making real progress in accepting responsibility for his actions. I hope it is true. Not for me, but for him. Everyone deserves the chance to become a better person, even if that happens behind bars. As for Ashley, I heard through Brenda that she had become a model prisoner. She was studying law through a distance program and helping other inmates with legal issues. Whether it was genuine or just another manipulation to reduce her sentence, I don't know. But I choose to believe that people can change, even if it is not my role to facilitate that for them. Today, when I tell my story, it is no longer with pain or anger. It is with strange gratitude. Gratitude for having survived. Gratitude because James honored the promise he made to my father. Gratitude for the lessons learned the hardest way possible. That night at the airport, when James locked the car doors and said, "Trust me," was the moment my life changed forever. It was the moment I discovered that the world isn't always what it seems, that people we love can betray us, but also that guardian angels exist in unexpected places. If I could go back in time and change that night, would I change everything that happened? I don't know if I would, because this journey, however painful it has been, transformed me into the woman I am today, a woman I am not ashamed to be. And in the end, maybe that is the best revenge against those who tried to destroy me. I didn't just survive, I thrived. Now, if you like this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments which part left you with your mouth open. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to have access to exclusive videos I don't post here. See you there.